Pterygopalatine fossa is a very small space in the lateral skull base, and it is surgically a difficult to access area, and for many of the students it is a difficult to understand area also. So I'll explain all about Pterygopalatine fossa, its boundaries, its contents and its connections with the other spaces. I think you will get a better understanding by looking to the skull. Okay, so this Pterygopalatine fossa is otherwise called the Spinopalating fossa or fossa Spinopalatina. Okay, so it is usually asked in short notes also. So Pterygopalatine fossa or Spinopalating fossa, all are the same. Actually it is an inverted pyramid. So you know what is a pyramid? This is a pyramid. So if it becomes an inverted pyramid, what will be the shape of that? Shape of an inverted pyramid. So I'll draw the Pterygopalatine fossa first, and then I'll show you the boundaries. Okay. So this is right Pterygopalatine fossa. In the skull, right side, right orbit, right maxilla. I have already explained the anatomy of maxillary sinus in an earlier class. Please go through that. And this Pterygopalatine fossa comes here. Here, this is intratemporal fossa. From the intratemporal fossa, you can go to the Pterygopalatine fossa. See, it's deep behind, almost inferior to the apex of orbit. Okay. See, here comes the Pterygopalatine fossa. So when I go, it goes through the intraorbital foramen, intraorbital fissure into the orbit. Okay, see, you can, from here it is going. So anteriorly comes what? Anteriorly comes maxilla, and superiorly what is there? So I am putting this one inside the Pterygopalatine fossa. So here you can see this is sphenoid, body of sphenoid, greater wing of sphenoid, then the middle cranial fossa. So superiorly the relations. So I will draw this on to the board. Okay. This one right Pterygopalatine fossa. This comes the anterior face. Okay. Anterior face. Anterior to posterior. Okay. So superior, inferior. Okay. So I already showed you that it comes behind or below, not behind, actually it comes below the apex of orbit. Okay. So apex of orbit comes here. Anteriorly, what was the relation? There came the maxilla. Okay. Your teeth, hard palate and teeth comes down, and above comes the anterior cranial fossa, and then comes the middle cranial fossa. Okay. And behind or just above the this Pterygopalatine fossa comes the body and the greater wing of sphenoid bone. Okay. So this is middle cranial fossa, anterior cranial fossa, and here comes the sphenoid bone. Okay. So it will be like this. And one more thing I will show you in the skull bone, that here, see this, here there is pterygoid plate. So the pterygoid plates come here. Okay, so actually it's a part of sphenoid. Again I took a class on anatomy of sphenoid bone earlier. So from looking from anterior, the view of sphenoid is like this is body, then it has got a lesser wing, there is a greater wing, and there are also two pterygoid plates. So this body and the greater wing and the pterygoid plate are associated with this Pterygopalatine fossa. Anteriorly comes the posterior wall of maxilla. You can see here that this is the posterior wall of maxilla. So actually this Pterygopalatine fossa is related to only a small part. Here there is a impression here, this part only. So actually it is supromedial part of the posterior wall of maxilla. It's not the entire posterior wall, only it comes, this Pterygopalatine fossa is so small that it comes only this much area, it occupies this much. So actually only this part, that is of the posterior wall, only the supromedial part. Okay, so this is medial, see connection with the lateral nasal wall, medial wall. So this is posterior wall, and of the posterior wall only the supromedial part of the posterior wall of maxilla. Okay. Postero-superiorly, okay, posteriorly and superiorly comes a middle cranial fossa. Okay, so and also postero-inferiorly in this direction, what comes here? Pharyngeal mucosa or your nasopharynx comes here. This nasopharynx, see? Nasopharynx here, and oral cavity. If you go directly downwards from that, there comes the oral cavity. Okay, so these are the relations of Pterygopalatine fossa. I will explain once more. Think that I am standing inside the Pterygopalatine fossa. So anteriorly, this area, just anteriorly comes the posterior wall of maxilla and also supromedial part. So superomedial part of the posterior wall of maxilla comes just anteriorly, and above comes the apex of orbit. Superiorly, what? Superiorly comes the body of sphenoid bone, and behind, what comes behind? Posteriorly comes the pterygoid plate. Okay, and postero-superiorly comes the middle cranial fossa. Postero-inferiorly comes the nasopharynx, and down, if this opening is very big, I will fall down into the oral cavity. There should be a medial relation and there should be a lateral relation. Okay, so medial and lateral relations. So laterally, see in this, it is communicating, there is no wall laterally, so it is communicating to the infratemporal fossa. It is coming, if this is my lateral wall, I can put my hand through the lateral wall into the infratemporal fossa. It is communicating. So here comes the pterygoid process, and here comes the maxilla. So what is this communication? That door is called pterygomaxillary fissure. So the Pterygopalatine fossa communicate with the infratemporal fossa through pterygomaxillary fissure. Okay, that is pterygomaxillary fissure. Laterally, through the pterygomaxillary fissure, it communicates with the infratemporal fossa. And what about the medial relation? Medial. Laterally, infratemporal fossa. Medial, what is the relation? What is the anatomy on the medial wall? In the medial wall, there is a bone called palatine bone. Okay, palatine bone. And this palatine bone has got vertical segment, and it has got a horizontal segment also. Okay. It has got a vertical segment of palatine bone and also a horizontal segment of palatine bone. So on the two sides it is coming and joining like this. Okay. Okay. So it has got a vertical part and a horizontal part, and also from the vertical part a pyramidal process is coming like this, and this part is coming and closing here. Okay, so in between on the down side here, see, this is pterygoid plate and this is hard palate. In between these two there is another process which is this pyramidal process. So below there is also a pyramidal process, and that is closing this gap. Otherwise something here will fall down into the oral cavity. So pyramidal process is there, coming and joining between this pterygoid plate and the hard palate and closing the entry of this pterygopalatine fossa into the oral cavity. Okay, and medially, if I remove the structure, this structure here on the lateral wall here, you will have this vertical plate of palatine bone here. It will come, and this vertical plate of palatine bone forms the medial boundary, and there is a notch in between. There is an opening in between the medial wall of the vertical plate of palatine bone. And what is that called? It is called the spino. Here comes a sphenoid bone and this is a palatine bone. So here this is called the Spinopalating Foramen. Okay, and through the Spinopalating Foramen, this is septum and the turbinate. And if I draw the Pterygopalatine foramen here, this will be the medial wall, isn't it? So here there will be an opening, and through the opening this Pterygopalatine fossa will communicate with the lateral wall of nose, and that is called the Spinopalating Foramen. Okay. So this space. There is an opening here. Okay. Tip of this probe is inside the right pterygopalatine fossa. So invariably this is anterior, posterior. Pterygopalatine fossa. Anteriorly, I already told you, it comes the posterior wall of maxilla, and that too not the entire maxilla, only the supromedial part of the posterior wall of maxilla. And superiorly, my probe is just pointing upwards. So superiorly, you can see it is coming through. This is body of maxilla, sphenoid bone. Sorry, this is body of sphenoid. This part. So body of sphenoid comes the superior relation, and I already told you this is infraorbital fissure. So this posterior part or apex of orbit. So I am keeping my probe inside the pterygopalatine fossa and see through the medial end of the infraorbital fissure. It is communicating with the orbit. Okay, I am pointing it through this. So it is coming to the orbit through the infraorbital fissure, and posteriorly you can see the pterygoid plate here, and here comes the pyramidal process of palatine bone. So in between there is greater palatine or the palatine canal. See, my probe is inside the palatine canal and it is going into the pterygopalatine fossa. Okay, so inferior, directly inferior, it is communicating with the oral cavity. Inferior relation is the posterior wall of maxilla. Posteriorly comes the pterygoid process. Superiorly it is the body of sphenoid, and also the postero-superiorly comes the middle cranial fossa, and postero-inferiorly there is nasopharynx, and directly downwards it is the oral cavity. And let us see the communications of this pterygopalatine fossa with other structures. Okay, the pterygopalatine fossa communicate with the orbit through the medial part of the infraorbital fissure. Okay, here comes the infraorbital fissure. So the medial part of infraorbital fissure, it communicates with the orbit. Then through the Spinopalating Foramen. it communicates with what? With the Spinopalating Foramen, it communicates with the nose. Okay, actually this Spinopalating Foramen in the nose comes in the medial part of, posterior part of the middle turbinate. Okay, so now superiorly in the middle cranial fossa there is foramen rotundum with the middle cranial fossa. Then posteriorly, here comes one lacerated foramen. What is that? Actually it is not a foramen, it is a fissure formed by so many, or dehiscence formed between so many bones. Anyway, this is foramen Lacerated. Okay. So this Pterygopalatine fossa has connection with the foramen Lacerated through what? Through pterygoid canal. Okay. So from here upper part of foramen Lacerated. Okay. So this one is pterygoid canal. And one more canal is there from the posterior part, but it goes inferiorly. Okay. So from the posto-inferior part, here comes a nasopharynx. So from here into the nasopharynx, what canal? It is a palatovaginal canal, or otherwise called the pharyngeal canal. It goes to the nasopharynx. So it is pharyngeal canal. Why it is called palatovaginal canal? Somebody once told me that it is a canal going from palate into the vagina. Never, don't think like that. It is a canal formed by two bony processes. One is the vaginal process of the pterygoid bone and also part of palatine bone. Okay, so that is why it is called the palatovaginal canal, or otherwise called pharyngeal canal. So from the posteriorly and inferiorly goes the pharyngeal canal, and directly downwards this thing goes like this into the oral cavity, and is called the greater palatine canal, or simply palatine canal. Goes like this. Okay, so I will explain one more. Think that I am standing inside right pterygopalatine fossa. So boundaries, in front comes the posterior wall of maxilla, and that to the supromedial part of the posterior wall of maxilla. And if I am looking for upwards, I can see the orbit. So if I put my hands through the medial part of infraorbital fissure, I will reach the orbit. Superiorly I have the body of sphenoid, and posteriorly I have the what? The pterygoid plate, and I can communicate with the middle cranial fossa, which is situated superiorly through the foramen rotundum. Also I communicate posteriorly with the foramen Lacerated through the pterygoid canal, and inferiorly I have the pharyngeal canal. And if I look downwards, I can through the palatine canal I can go into the oral cavity. Okay, and laterally I go through the pterygomaxillary fissure into the infratemporal fossa, and medially through the Spinopalating Foramen I can go into the nose. Okay, so these are the boundaries and also the communications. Mainly it is filled with fat, and through this comes the maxillary division, maxillary nerve, maxillary division of trigeminal, and also I have the third part, or the terminal branches of maxillary artery. Okay, and also maxillary nerves comes like this, and suspended from the maxillary nerve is the pterygopalatine ganglion. Okay, it is suspended from the maxillary nerve like a monkey. So the fat, then the maxillary nerve, then the pterygopalatine or Spinopalating ganglion, and also the terminal branches or the third part of the maxillary artery. These are the contents of Pterygopalatine fossa. That is all about Pterygopalatine fossa. Hope you got a very good understanding of this Pterygopalatine fossa.